All right, how's everyone doing? Usually the after lunch spot is tough, but I think the air conditioning here will keep everybody awake, so I'm happy about that. The title is different than it was on the thing outside. I replaced the interconnectedness of DevOps with an equally nebulous and meaningless title, so pay no attention to that. You can always find me on Twitter. I'm at Damon Edwards. I do a lot of writing at devdops.org, or you can just email me at damon@dtosolutions if you ever need to get in contact with me. So a bit about DTO Solutions and my company, because it factors very importantly into sort of what I'm doing here today. So DTO, we're automation guys. We pride ourselves being great at solving really any application deployment and provisioning automation problem that we could solve, right? And we got hired by all kinds of big companies to come and help them solve these problems. And we're very proud of ourselves. We assembled some of these great automation gurus, Alex Honor, my co-founder, Anthony Shortland, Moses Lay. I don't know if these names ring a bell to anybody here. We had it, and we were very proud of the things that we could automate, and there wasn't a problem that we felt we couldn't solve. But for some reason, we decided to actually be serious about ourselves and say, well, how effective really are we, right? And we looked at our kind of statement of work success ratio, and we were like 100%. We were nailing every one. There wasn't a thing that we could put in front of us that we couldn't find a way to automate. Massive scale for big gaming companies, super complex application stacks for financial services. It was great. But then we kind of got a little more introspective and said, but how many of those solutions actually mattered? How many times did we deliver something that actually stuck? That a year later, the company was thriving. They were in a better place. The business was more successful because of the bits that we delivered. And the reality was, it was really more like 50-50. And we kind of said, well, why is that? And some of our clients were even asking us, well, hey, how are these folks being so successful? And we've got all the right tools and all the right people, and we can't seem to be as successful. So it really got us thinking. This is like in the 2007, 2008 timeframe. And so he said, well, let's start to really dig in here and find out, what is it that's making these high performers successful and the low performers, the low performers. So he said let's do this kind of in-depth analysis. Let's look at all levels. Let's look at the people level. Let's look at the culture, how they approach their work, what their kind of thought process is, right? How they organize themselves. Let's look at their processes, right? How do they formalize? What's their day-to-day work look like? What do the handoffs look like? What does the activity of the work look like? And then obviously the tools level, right? That part we knew we had in hand. And so the reality was, starting at the bottom with the tools, we found that really didn't have much of an impact one way or the other. We had some low performers using the exact same tools as the high performers. We had different high performers using radically different tooling and radically different tools approaches. So we quickly realized that the real difference came in these two levels up here. The people level, the culture level, right? And at the process level. And that's how DTO, we kind of transformed ourselves into these accidental business process and business transformation coaches. And around the same time, this guy Patrick Dubois, who I think has been mentioned several times today, he, as Kevin said, decided to get people together in Belgium for this conference, and it was a very he's not a marketing guy, so we literally called it, well, it's going to be developers there, it's going to be ops there, and it's 2 days long. So we called it DevOps Days. And from that, an interesting collection of people came. Some of my colleagues went as well. And the conversation carried over onto Twitter and actually formed on Twitter in the first place. That's where the idea for the conference came from. It's really more of a meetup than a conference. And just people, as they left, they wanted to keep tweeting about this stuff. And if you know Twitter at all, the extra 4 characters is prime real estate. So people just lopped off the name Days, and it became hashtag DevOps, and hence the DevOps name, the DevOps movement was born. So that happened kind of around the same time as we were becoming these accidental combination of business consultants, process consultants, and automation consultants. And that's kind of how we really got involved early in the DevOps movement and kind of ran with it. So people always ask us, well, oops, sorry, say it went a little too fast there. What is DevOps, right? And they say, we heard DevOps is hot. Can we buy some DevOps, right? Just tell us how to do it, right? And it's always difficult. You have to explain to them that, what another company does is probably not going to be successful to you. In fact, if you just start with this question of, give me DevOps, what is DevOps? You're probably going to see a mismatch of different ideas and conflicting opinions, and everyone's got a 10-step process. By the way, I thought Greg's 5-step process today was great. And they're all going to get you to the right place if you start with the right question, right? So the question is not, what is DevOps? The question you really want to focus in on is, why DevOps? Because if you start to step back and look at these high-performing companies and understand their why, what it is they're trying to accomplish, what their mission in life is, sort of how they view the world, then it all starts to make sense. You start to see the similarities between these different approaches and these different ways of doing things. So the critical thing is to start with why DevOps, right? And I think the most interesting part about this, if you look at these different high-performing companies, it's a pretty audacious why. For them, they truly believe that IT operations is a strategic advantage. That DevOps improving their IT operations, particularly their ability to deliver services faster, more reliably, quicker, that is a strategic advantage that they can use as a competitive advantage to win in their industry. So this is no longer a release management problem. It's not even a CIO problem. This is a CEO business problem. This is a strategic thing that we could use as a weapon, either defensive to keep the industry from catching us, or offensive to take down our larger competitors. Very critical point there. So, to understand sort of how that works, you got to kind of step back and look at it from the business perspective, right? So there's this guy, Steve Blank. I don't know if anyone's read this book, The 4 Steps to the Epiphany. Some folks, maybe. Has anybody read The Lean Startup? Eric Ries, you know what that is? Okay, so this is Eric Ries's professor. So he writes the books, he does the research. Eric Ries is awesome at building communities and practice and doing marketing and that kind of stuff. And he's a Stanford professor and famous guy for studying, what makes innovation and entrepreneurship and these companies tick. What makes the great ones succeed. And he really boils it down to there's really 2 kinds of risk that a business is going to have, right? The first one is invention risk, right? It's the stuff, it's unknown whether the technology can ever be made to work, right? But this is, cure for cancer, cold fusion, the wireless battery charging. These are things that the definite technology is the risk. And the other kind is this customer market risk. It's unknown whether customers are actually going to buy our products. Now, I'm pretty sure for most of the people in this room that the invention risk is not the problem, right? We may have an execution risk, but eventually it's engineering work. The technology is going to work. We know how to scale services. We know how to run services, deliver services. We know how to make software work. It's a proven art. The technology is out there. The problem that we all have is this bottom one, right? It's the customer market fit. Can we give the customers a thing they want, when they want it, better than our competitors? And it's the kind of thing where no company stands still, right? So it's got the constant pace of moving forward. So this can also be thought of as, if you like to call it, innovation risk, right? Can we take a technology or an idea and can we apply it and succeed? So continuing on this thread, what does a basic unit of innovation activity look like, right? You've got a business guy, he's got an idea. And then at some point, there's a customer outcome, right? And the things we really care about here are really 3 things. One is this feedback loop, right? How quickly can we get a response from the customer to know, are we on the right path? And a major portion of that is lead time. How fast did it take us to get that out to market? And the third part is just effectiveness, right? Can we, as an organization, can we do this enough? Which often will be confused with cost effectiveness, but it's more just saying the amount of people we have, can we get this work done? So, but innovation in general is inherently a risky activity, right? So, in fact, most people overestimate their ability to be innovative. That, I'm going to have the right idea. I'm going to do it right because I know best. In fact, there's a company, they're a consulting group, they're called the Doblin Group. They're famous product innovation strategists, and they work with all the big product people around the world. And they did a study, part on survey, part on their own work. And they figured out that for all the non-life sciences activity, innovation activity that goes on out there, that the actual success rate, 4%. So it said of all innovation activity out there, only 4% of it hits the mark as expected or better than expected, which really means that 96% of attempts fail, right? It's a pretty miserable attempt. So, how do you decrease that risk, right? You decrease it by improving your ability to learn and react quickly, right? So, really what they're saying is, do you have to turn innovation into a numbers game, right? There's kind of two schools of thought of innovation. One's the hero's quest, right? If we think really hard, if we hire the right people, if we hold it close to our vest and tinker with it as much as we can before we show it to the world, that's going to be our big chance of success. And then there's the other strategy that Stephen Blank and Eric Ries and all these guys like to talk about, which is the shots on goal strategy. We're just going to continually, faster and faster, make attempts to improve ourselves. We're going to have an idea, we're going to execute, we're going to learn, have an idea, execute, learn, and so on and so forth. And really what they're doing is turning this into a numbers game. Whereas if you have company A here who employs the high stake strategy, and they're going to have this one sort of long delivery process, versus company B here who takes the shots on goal strategy. Well, if they can get 4 attempts at success in the same amount of time or the same amount of budget that company A can, they fundamentally have, all things being equal, have an advantage. Now you play that out to be 8 times, 12 times, 16 times, 30 times, right? You've seen folks now in the kind of DevOps case studies where they're taking 20, 30 shots a month at releasing new features to their customers, trying new experiments, versus their competitors that are taking 6 months, 12 months to get something out to market. So like a poker game and having a giant pile of chips, the more shots you're able to take at that prize, it's just the law of averages, you're going to have a better chance of success, right? There we go. Fail and big bucks. All right. One more time, sorry. Oh, and I'm not going to read all this. The slides are available later, but go talk to the business folks in your organization. This is known stuff, right? I mean, for 20 years now, the business has been saying that the faster we can learn, our ability to learn, our ability to move quicker is a competitive advantage. So, we've been talking about the business side of this, right? But, the people in this room, I think most of us aren't business folks. What do we have to do? What's our job? What's this got to do with us, right? This is a bunch of business ideas. Our job is to give the company the capability to learn faster than our competitors. Okay, we need to give them the capabilities, the systems, the processes to be able to take those shots at goal faster than our competitors can. And how we do that? Well, if you go back to that innovation lifecycle we're talking about, it looks a lot like a normal application lifecycle, right? Well, we all know what happens here, right? We've got all these pieces that go from a business idea to a running feature in a customer-facing environment. We've got all these silos that need to be crossed, right? And cartoonishly, we like to talk about those as the dev activity and ops activity, but we know there's a lot more things in there, right? Well, as we all know, what's the problems, right? Well, these disconnects, these miscommunications, these bottlenecks start to grow between those silos. Well, that's our DevOps problems, right? Or as sometimes people like to say, they call it the walls of confusion, right? That build up between these different roles where these handoffs have to happen. So really all DevOps is saying, all right, well, how are we going to break down those walls? How are we going to remove those bottlenecks, the risks, the inefficiencies, the bad handoffs that happen across that life cycle so we can shorten that time to market, so we can get a faster feedback, and we can get more cranks on and get our cycle time down so where we can give the business a better chance of success. So that's our job, to make that picture a reality. So, how fast do these high performers move, right? What kind of things are we talking about here? Right? Really we're talking about code features from concept to a customer-facing environment in days, not months. The idea that someone can walk out of a meeting at 9 a.m. on a Monday, and by lunchtime on Friday, we have some new feature or some new set of things out to our customers. It's that kind of regular. That's not an uncommon thing in the nowadays amongst the high performers that we're talking about, not everybody in the world. New ready-to-use environments on the this is getting into the technology. Being able to give developers or QA new environments in literally minutes, not weeks, right? Think about how long it takes you now to provision a QA environment, right? An incident response in seconds, not hours, right? And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. And in general, the rule of thumb is we got to stop planning our lives with calendars and start thinking about stopwatches. And there's plenty of examples out there of companies and even highly regulated industries, financial services including, who are making these kinds of numbers a reality. So, how do they do that, right? It sounds pretty fantastic. And there's a lot of kind of case studies out there, or a lot of conference speeches you can go and watch online where people will show you sort of this is how we do it kind of step by step. And the problem is the things they're doing, their world's not going to look like your world. Different constraints, different applications, different architectures, different legacy, different organizational structures. So if you want to kind of boil it down to some of the higher level ideas that they're going for, let's look at what they actually are doing. So the first thing is, and this is kind of not a big surprise, is they're focusing on what actually matters to the business, right? They looked at the old way that we managed IT organizations and said, there's too much thought on optimizing for efficiency. People running around, project managers, what are you doing? What are you doing? Are you busy? That team doesn't have enough work. People are getting incentivized per pound of code that they can deliver, or bushels of tickets that they can close, right? So everything's being optimized for how we're using our labor. Let's push things offshore because it's cheaper labor, right? A lot of optimization for efficiency. Well, these new folks, the way they're thinking about it is optimizing for throughput. Because we said what matters to the business here is the throughput that we can get. How quickly can we get these ideas? If our job is much like a translation service, there's a business idea, and we got to turn it into a customer outcome, and all that stuff that happens in the middle, we need to optimize for the quality and the throughput, not for the efficiency of any one of those pieces. In fact, you can argue that the efficiency just really doesn't matter, right? So how do they optimize for that throughput? I'm going to go into each of these things in a little more detail. But really, they've got some kind of new ways of thinking. They've got some new ways of actually doing their work, and then they've actually changed how they've organized themselves. So the first one of these kind of new ways of thinking, they talk a lot about reducing batch sizes, right? Think about it. Well, we're trying to optimize for feedback, right? Trying to get faster feedback, trying to optimize for throughput. So what's the fastest way to do that? Well, instead of saying let's work on some 6 months worth of work, let's break those down into 1 week chunks of work, right? Well, automatically we've got a gain there where we're getting things from point A to point B quicker. We also it gives us better confidence because we know that these smaller batches of changes being pushed to these services, we can guarantee that we know that within that small batch, if there's a problem, we know where to go and find it. There's all kinds of things with queuing theories and stuff that I won't go into now that really kind of bring this to life, how important this principle is. In fact, there's a great book, this guy Doug Reinertson, I think I'm saying his name right, called The Principles of Product Development Flow. If anybody doubts sort of the science behind how small batch sizes and focusing on flow improves the throughput and quality of an organization, I highly recommend you go and read that. Another mindset shift, and I'll explain why there's a giant monkey on the screen in a second. But it's planning for failure, right? They kind of realize that we've had all this thought in our industry of uptime. It's all going to be about resiliency and fault tolerance, and look where that's gotten us, right? We still have failures all over the place, still have outages all over the place. So they kind of came to this realization that planning, that you have to plan for failure. You have to expect failure to happen, and failure is definitely going to happen at the component level, and it's also going to happen at the service level, right? So they came to the realization that we need to build that into our thinking, to assume that any given component at any time could go away, could die. And the idea is that we need to build our systems and build our way of thinking to expect for that and allow for that. In fact, so this monkey here, it's a story, they do this at Netflix. They have this notion of a thing called the chaos monkey. Has anybody heard of this before? A few people? Right, so just the rest of you, what they do, and this might sound crazy to you, they have a process running in their production environments that randomly wakes up, randomly logs into one of their production servers, and randomly kill -9 destroys a process. All day long, this happens. This is just part of their daily life. Now, that sounds crazy, right? But think of their why. Their why is that they need this confidence that they have these fault-tolerant services. Outages happen. They realize that. So basically, to enforce that, they first, in a sort of controlled game day environment, they built this process and ran it to see what happened. And then they just got to the point and said, well, let's just let this thing run all the time. So they're constantly testing themselves for failure from the inside. In fact, now they have something called the Chaos Gorilla that actually will take down an entire Amazon availability zone just to make sure that they're resilient. So it's very important. And really kind of what this drove from is, when you go to these DevOps Days conferences, you get people talking about airplane disasters, plane NTSB, safety reports and cockpit flight recorders, and talking about immune systems. Because they're looking at other scientific systems and saying that, we're building complex systems here, and we're working on complex systems, and that failure is inevitable. That you think you can tame the system, you can't. Right? You think it's just not going to happen. There's plenty of research out there that shows that the system will always find a way to get the better of you. In fact, there's like a 5-page paper. I don't have a picture of it because it's literally an academic paper by an MD. It's going to be Richard Cook. It's Google for how complex systems fail. And it's a fantastic 5-page paper that really just breaks down how the complex systems will always get the best of you. So another major mindset shift here is that failure is going to happen. Another major mindset shift is to limit that work in progress. I don't know if you folks use a Kanban board or if Kanban something that you work with, but and I'm not talking about Kanban from the kind of project management perspective, but really what's fascinating about the use of it is that these numbers up here, right? How it works is you've got an item in a backlog, it moves the specification to doing, to acceptance, to in production. But what those numbers up top mean is it limits what they call the WIP, the work in progress. And they're saying that for any given step of the process, we're only going to allow so many items to be worked on at once. And really what they've realized is much like your traffic on the way to work, right? If a freeway is 65% available, you'll get to work in 15 minutes, right? If the freeway is 100% full, you'll get to work in an hour and a half, right? And it's the same type of thing with any kind of queue, any kind of flow-based activity, that extra capacity in the system helps you move things quickly through. Again, they're solving for throughput, not for the efficiency of the individual. So they protect the work in progress not only for the individual steps in the process, but also for an individual. An individual, they'll put a little sticky with your name on it, or a little magnet with your name on it, and you only have 1 or 2. And you can put your name on the card you're working on, but no more than 2 at once. So it's a way to basically ensure that they don't have that thrashing and the constant destructiveness of overloading people with too much work. And by doing that, they're actually able to get, as a system, far better throughput and far more effectiveness out of the organization. Don't worry about all this is. I'll talk more about it in my presentation tomorrow, but this is just a value stream map. And really the important thing here is that down the bottom, the thick arrows are artifact flow, how things, actual artifacts you hand off. And the top is information flows, those little skinny lines. And this is a common picture we see at big enterprises, that they think they have an automation problem, but the reality is it's a massive information flow problem. Handoffs, trouble tickets, cube over the cube wall conversations, README files, spreadsheets. That's where the chaos happens. That's where the mismatch happens. That's where the bad problems happen. So instead of these folks say, let's get rid of that. Let's turn as much of that as we can into artifact flow. So we're handing off code. We're handing off, runbook jobs. We're handing off things that either work or they don't work, and make it an engineering handoff versus some kind of human knowledge transfer. So another very important principle that these folks all seem to follow. So when it comes down to reducing the handoff, the pains of the handoffs. So one of the key things, the key concepts is really test-driven everything. They'll turn everything they can into a new way to do testing. So not just testing as QA as some part that happens sort of in the middle after development is done, But they'll employ a method called test-driven development, where they've automated acceptance tests from the very beginning. Building deployment verification tests, so when you hand off something to another person, they can know right away on startup, is this thing healthy and functioning properly? Constant API validation tests for both internal and external APIs. Operational health tests, so they got the actual ops folks writing tests as well and building them to go with their releases. But the key thing is not just that they're doing all these levels of testing, but they're actually turning all those things into artifacts that then get released with the code. The tests, the code, the configuration, the automation, all gets bundled up as one thing, and that's what moves through the lifecycle. So to them, tests are assets that need to be versioned and moved along with their code. This probably goes without saying, is that I think it's been realized that silos are the #1 enemy of throughput and quality, right? So think about a normal organization here. You got your business team, they've got their ideas, they give some ideas, they write a feature spec, it hands off to the dev team who then writes some code, hands off to a release team, and has to go and make it work in operations. Then there's an ops team that gets waken up in the middle of the night when something goes wrong, and has to try to make this thing scale if they didn't develop, right? So, first problem with these silos is you've created all these handoffs. So every different silo you've got a new handoff to contend with. And as organization scales, these silos get distributed, they get more hardened, they get spread out even further, and these handoffs become more problematic. The other issue is, you have these knowledge attrition problems where, application knowledge starts huge in development and goes to next to nothing when it comes to the ops team. Same way the operational knowledge, how the stuff's going to work, is huge in the operations organization and gets thinner and thinner as you get further back in the development lifecycle. And the business intent is strong in the business side, but gets worse and worse as you go along. And then you've got the problem that the people on the left, they've got big ownership, they control everything, but they don't have really any accountability. But then the people on the right, they've got all the accountability, but they don't really own anything, right? So basically, silos put you in a world of pain, and these effects just kind of spiral out of control the larger and more entrenched that you get. So, what are these folks doing, and what are the high performers doing to get rid of this? Well, they're redrawing their organization. They're saying, let's move away from these functional silos and look to build these cross-functional teams. And these cross-functional teams are not done by component, like our login service and our database service or whatever it might be. They do it by customer-aligned value streams, by things that your customer would recognize, like, oh, this is our quote service, this is our online banking service, this is our retail brokerage service, whatever it might be. That's how they're building their teams. And in those teams, you have your product owners, you have your business representatives, you have developers, you have testing, you have operational knowledge. All that is being distributed and contained and realigned towards those value streams. So the question always comes up, well, what about cross-cutting concerns? What are people doing about that? And so if you imagine this service delivery team, right? They're turning ideas into features for customers. Got the product owner, development, testing, operations. What about stuff like QA, InfoSec, monitoring, deployment, infrastructure management? What about these cross-cutting concerns that we can't divide up and put into all of those teams? Well, what they're doing is they are having those individual groups, but instead of being handoffs, instead of being another step in the process that needs to be taken care of, those folks are actually focused on building services, right? And they're exposing those services to these service delivery teams who are consuming them in a pull-based model, right? I think Amazon is a fantastic example of this. And the Netflix example is also a great one too, that they say, don't have a team that knows how to do monitoring. Have a team that builds a monitoring service and teaches other folks how to write the monitoring tests and insert them into the service. Same way with testing, same way with InfoSec, and kind of on down the line. So they're thinking about their world very much a pull-based way to say if the service delivery team needs some external thing, whether it be infrastructure or testing or even regulatory compliance, how can we build a service that they can consume just like they would consume server resources or storage from Amazon Web Services. Same model, but for all the different kind of operational concerns. And so, really what they're got at here is they've redrawn their organization to distribute responsibility and control to the edges, right? Instead of saying, look at these kind of groups that hold these things. So we're going to have centralized tooling and decentralized control, meaning that, number one, self-service is the optimal mode of working, right? Number two, that everything's in a pull, not in a push. So we have to get away from this toxic thing where we're going to have these requirements pushed down on people, and then developers are going to push new features on the release team, and then has to push new things onto the operations team. Instead, turn around, make it service-oriented, have them be pulling as they go, very much like a lean manufacturing construct. And by doing that, they're enabling these teams to decouple themselves and start to move at their own pace, which, going back to the queuing theory and those things, improves flow dramatically through the organization. But you have to be very careful here that you can't just say, well, I'm giving you all this control to push the buttons and make things happen, but now you have none of the responsibility. Instead, they're saying, I'm going to give you the flexibility and control, that's the carrot, right? But I'm also going to give you the responsibility, that's the stick. And one of the things they say is you own uptime for the things you create. If you're that service delivery team, you own the uptime in production for that service. If you're one of those underlying cross-functional services, you own the uptime for that service. It fails at 3 o'clock in the morning, the developer's pager goes off, not some nebulous knock team in some other country that will handle your problems for you. So it's a very critical idea there. They give control, but they also give responsibility with that. And by the way, that's a great way to make sure that the code quality goes up, is give a developer a pager and say, if this thing breaks in production, you're getting woken up. And also no orphan services. This idea of a sustaining engineering organization that somehow is going to clean up the mess later is just a completely foreign concept. To them, something's never done until that service is decommissioned and no longer used in production. So the hard, fast rule that everything that gets developed has an owner who's responsible for its entire life cycle. So recap, I know I threw a lot of stuff at you guys, but this is the kind of things that people are thinking about. So the change in mindsets, batch sizes, limited work in progress, planning for failure, reducing handoff pains, right? Turning information flows into artifact flows, test-driven everything. And redrawing the organization, removing silos, distributing ownership and control, pull-based lifecycle. This is the stuff that is making the world move faster. So, how do you know you're succeeding, right? What are the DevOps metrics that make sense? Number one, people focus on reducing cycle time, obvious. Two is they focus on reducing mean time to detect. They know that we're getting better as an organization. Our capabilities are improving if we can detect failure faster, right? Again, it goes to that we know failure is going to happen. So to plan for it, we need to be able to detect these failures faster. The faster we can detect failures, the faster we can get our fixes done, the faster stuff can get through the life cycle. So with that mean time detection, the other side of that is mean time to repair. How quickly can we get a service back up, right? That might mean just reprovision the old service, bam, go, right? And then there's mean time to fix. We may have repaired the service, but how quickly can we get that change back to the development organization, pumped back out, and so we've permanently fixed the problem. And the last one, this is a kind of curious one, is reduce scrap rate, right? Or some people call it improved quality at the source. They say that if a problem's going to exist, we know problems are going to come up. How many problems escape the locale of where the problem was created? So if a developer does something incorrectly or there's a bug, how many of those bugs escape their grasp and move on to the next step in the life cycle versus how many problems are caught at the source right there? So another good way to tell, are you getting better as an organization? And you see folks using these 4 metrics as a way to really drive improvement and really focus on the service delivery capability of their organization. So, people always ask, well, what's the first step? Jesus, I just threw a million things at you guys. What can we do about that? That's my talk tomorrow at 9:45 in Fisher AB. I'm also going to go out to that poolside bar tonight, kind of get a fruity cocktail and watch some Monday Night Football. So, I work for drinks. So there you go. And that's it. Sorry I fire hose blast you guys. If you've got any, I'll be here all the rest of the conference if you've got any questions. And I think I'm going to be part of the panel next. So with that, Kevin, back to you. Thanks for listening, guys.